In this little video, we're going to try to read the introductory few pages of Elias Ashmole's Theatrum Chemicum Britannicum, containing several poetical pieces of our famous English philosophers who have written the Hermetic mysteries in their own ancient language, faithfully collected into one volume, with the notations thereon. That's 1652. All right. To all ingeniously elaborate students in the most divine mysteries of Hermetic learning, the subject of this ensuing work is a philosophical account of that eminent secret treasured up in the bosom of nature, which hath been sought for of many, but found by few, notwithstanding experienced antiquity, hath afforded faithful, though not frequent, discoveries thereof. Past ages have like rivers conveyed down to us upon the float the more light and sophistical pieces of learning. But what were profound and mysterious, the weight and solidity thereof sunk to the bottom, whence every one who attempts to dive cannot easily fetch them up. So that what our Saviour said to his disciples may, I hope without offence, be spoken to the elected sons of art. Unto you it is given to know the mysteries of the kingdom of God, but to others in parables, that seeing that they might not see, and hearing they may not understand. Our English philosophers generally, like prophets, have received little honour, unless what hath been privately paid them, in their own country. Nor have they done any mighty works amongst us, except in covertly administering their medicine to a few sick and healing them. For greater experiments than what is performed in physic, they never publicly make show of. Thus did Io, one of the first four fellows of the Fratres Rosicrucis, in curing the young Earl of Norfolk of the leprosy, and Dr. B, in carrying off the virulency of the smallpox twice from Queen Elizabeth, and so much that they never appeared, but in parts abroad they have found the more noble reception, and the world greedy of obtaining their works. Nay, rather than they want the sight thereof, contented to view them through a translation, though never so imperfect. Witness what Maierus, Hermanus, Combacius, Faber, and many others have done, the first of which came out of Germany to live in England, purposely that he might so understand our English tongue, as to translate Norton's Ordinal into Latin verse, which most judiciously and learnedly he did. Yet, to our shame be it spoken, his entertainment was too coarse for so deserving a scholar. How great a blemish it is then to us that refuse to read so famous authors in our natural language, whilst strangers are necessitated to read them in ours, to understand them in their own, yet think the dignity of the subject much more deserving than their pains. If this we do but ingeniously consider, we shall judge it more of reason than we look back upon, than neglect such pieces of learning, as our natives of our own country, and by this inquisition find no nation hath written more or better, although at present as well, through our own supineness, through our own supineness as the decrees of fate, few of their works can be found. John Leland took very much pains, even at the yielding up of the ghost of our English learning, to preserve its latest, but weakest cause almost spent breath, and from him John Bale, with John Pitts, who indeed is but Bale's plagiary, hath left us a catalogue of the writers of this nation, and that's ne'er all. Yet posterity, for this is deeply obliged. What punishment, then, did their pestilent malice deserve who robbed us of their whole works? A judicious author, speaking of the dissolution of our monasteries, saith thus, Many manuscripts guilty of no other superstition than red letters in the font were condemned to the fire, and here a principal key of antiquity was lost to the great prejudice of posterity. Indeed, such was learning's misfortune, as that great devastation of our English libraries, that where a red letter or a mathematical diagram appeared, they were sufficient to entitle the book to be popish or diabolical. Our English nation hath ever been happy for learning and learned men, and to illustrate this, I hope it will not prove distasteful. At first, the Druidi, the famous and mysterious Druidi, that were priests, diviners, and wise men, and took their original and name from Druidus Saronius, the fourth king of the Celts, styled Sapientium in Augurium Doctor, who died anno mundi 2069. Next, the Bardi, who celebrated the illustrious deeds of famous men, which they ingeniously disposed in heroic verse, and sung them to the sweet melody of the harp, amongst other testimonies. Hereof received Chaucer's. I can't quite read this. The old gentile Britons in her days of diverse adventures mad and lies, burned best in her mother tongue, which lies with her instruments they song. A lay is like a little ditty. These philosophers had their name from Bardus Druydus, the fifth king of the Celts, who was the first inventor of verses, as Berosius tells us, and died in the year of the world 2138. Neither of these sects of philosophers used any writing. Indeed, it was not lawful, for such was the policy and curiosity of elder ages, to defend their learning and mysteries from the injury of ignorant interpretations, that they delivered them to posterity by tradition only. Caesar testifies, and 'tis a noble testimony, that the learning of the Druidi was first invented in Britain, and thence transferred into France, and that, in all of his time, those of France came over hither to be instructed. Agricola, in Tacitus, prefers the Britons before the students of France, notwithstanding that they were of a docible wit, and apt to learn, in that they were curious in attaining the eloquence of the Latin tongue. As for magic, Pliny tells us it flourished in Britain, and that the people that were so devoted to it, yea, with all the complements of ceremony, a man would think that even the Persian learned his magic thence. A German poet says that when the world was troubled with Panochic invasions, England flourished in the knowledge of all good arts, and was able to send of her learned men into other countries to propagate learning, and instances Winifred, alias Boniface, the Devonshire man, and Willibrord, the northern man, that were sent into Germany. Nay, more, England was twice schule mistress to France, for so saith Peter Ramus, namely, first by the Druidi, who taught them their discipline, and afterwards by Alcunius, in Charles the Great's time, through whose persuasions the emperor founded the University of Paris. For the Saxons, it is not to be denied that many of them, after their conversion to Christianity, were exceedingly learned, and before that, much addicted to soothsaying, augury, divination by the neighing of horses, and so on. And 'tis worth the inquiry, there being more in it than we ordinarily apprehend, why they in general all worshipped Hertus, Dame, Mother Earth, for a goddess, and honored Mercury above all the gods of the Germans, whom they called Wodan. Hence, Wodansday, now our Wednesday. For they believed that this Dame, Hertus, intermediated in humane affairs, and relieved the poor, whose image was made armed, standing among flowers, having in its right hand a staff, and in it a banner, wherein was painted a rose, in the other hand a balance, and upon the head thereof a cock, on the breast a carved bear, and before the middle a fixed scythian, in chief whereof was also a balance, in face a lion, and in point a rose. And for their god Voidon they esteemed him as their god of battle, representing him by an armed man, insomuch that we to this very day retain the word wood among us, to signify fierce, furious, raging. As when one is in a great rage, we usually say, he is wood. Okay? So the Mercury of the philosophers is shadowed under the fierce and terrible names of lion, dragon, poison, and so on. But this is not all, although it be something. And now to come yet nearer to ourselves, we must needs say that of later times, since the conquest, our nation hath produced such famous and eminently learned men, as have equalled, if not surpassed, the greatest scholars of other nations. And happy were we, if now we could but partake of those legacies they left, which envy and ignorance has defrauded us of. Howsoever the small remainder which is left, we have no good reason to prize. For out of old fields, as men saith, cometh all this new toin, cosne, from year to year, and out of the old books and good saith, there cometh all of this sevens that merlier. Okay. That England hath been successively enriched with such men, our countryman John Leland, and I never heard he was partial, abundantly testifies, who avers that generally we have had a great number of excellent wits and writers, learned with the best of times served, who besides their knowledge in the four tongues, in which part of them excelled, there was no liberal science or any feat concerning learning, in which they have not showed certain arguments of great felicity and wit. And thus much for the generality of learning. Now for a particular account of the Hermetic Science, vouchsafe, ingenious reader, to accept the ensuing collections, yet not so as if therein were contained all the works of our English Hermetic philosophers, for more are designed in a second part to follow and complete a full Theatrum, which God, allowing me further time and tranquillity to run through it, as I have already, this I intend shortly to make ready for the press, whereby yet it is yet more to manifest what men we have had, no less famous for this kind of philosophy than for all other commendable arts and sciences. To add anything to the praise thereof were but to hold a candle before the sun. Or should I here deliver a full account of the marvelous operations and effects thereof, it would be as far beyond the limits of a preface, as remote from the belief of the generality of the world. Nor do I expect that all my readers should come with an engagement to believe what I here write, or that there was ever such thing in rerum natura as what we call a philosopher's stone, nor will I persuade them to it, though I must tell them I have not the vanity to publish these sacred and serious mysteries and arcana as romances. 'Tis enough that I know incredulity is given to the world as a punishment. Yet I'll tell them what one of our ancient poetical philosophers says. I must profess I know enough to hold my tongue, but not enough to speak. And no less real than miraculous fruits I have found in my diligent inquiry into these arcana lead me on to such degrees of admiration, they command silence, and force me to lose my tongue. Yet, as one greatly affecting my native country and the satisfaction of all ingenious artists, I have published for their use these ensuing collected antiquities, and shall here say something more than they speak of. He who shall have the happiness to meet with St. Dustin's work De Occulta Philosophia, a book which EGAI made much use of, and which shall chiefly back what I here am about to say, may therein read such stories as will make him amazed to think what stupendous and immense things are to be performed by virtue of the philosopher's Mercury, of which a taste only and no more. And first of the mineral stone, the which is wrought up to the degree only that hath the power of transmuting any imperfect earthy matter into its utmost degree of perfection, that is to convert the base of metals into a perfect gold and silver, flints into all manner of precious stones, as rubies, sapphires, emeralds, and diamonds, and so on, and many more experiments of the like nature. But this is but a part, so it is the least share of that blessing which may be acquired by the philosopher's materia, if the full virtue thereof were known. Gold, I confess, is a delicious object, a goodly light, which we admire and gaze upon, ut pueri in unionis avem, but as to make gold, saith an incomparable author, is the chiefest intent of the alchemists. So was it scarce any intent of the ancient philosophers, and the lowest use the adepti made of this materia. For they, being lovers of wisdom more than worldly wealth, drove at higher and more excellent operations. And certainly he, to whom the whole course of nature lies open, rejoiceth not so much that he can make gold and silver, or the devils to become subject to him, as that he sees the heavens open, the angels of God ascending and descending, and that his own nature is fairly written in the book of life. Next, to come to the vegetable, magical, and angelical stones, the which have in them no part of the mineral stone. Quatenus aston, fermented with metallin and earthy nature, for they are marvellously subtle, and each of them differing in operation and nature, because fitted and fermented for several effects and purposes. Doubtless Adam, with the fathers before the flood and since, Abraham, Moses, and Solomon, wrought many wonders by them, yet the utmost of their virtues they never fully understood, nor indeed any, but God, the maker of all things in heaven and earth, blessed for evermore. For by the vegetable may be perfectly known the nature of man, beasts, fowls, fishes, together with all kinds of trees, plants, flowers, and so on, and how to produce and make them, grow, flourish, and bear fruit, how to increase them in color and smell, and when and where we please, and all this not only at an instant, experimenti gratia, but daily, monthly, and yearly, at any time, at any season, yea, in the depth of winter, and therefore not unlike, but the walnut tree which anciently grew in Glastonbury churchyard, and never put forth leaves before St. Barnaby's day, yet then was fully loaded with them, as also the hawthorn there, so greatly famed for shooting forth leaves and flowers at Christmas, together with the oak in New Forest in Hampshire, that bore green leaves at the same season, may be some experiments made of the vegetable stone. Besides the masculine part of it, which is wrought up to a solar quality, and through its exceeding heat will burn up and destroy any creature, plant, and so on, that which is lunar and feminine, if immediately applied, will mitigate it with its extreme cold. And in like manner the lunar quality benumbs and congeals any animal, and so on, unless it be presently helped and resolved by that of the sun. For though they both are made out of one natural substance, yet in working they have contrary qualities. Nevertheless, there is such a natural assistance between them, that what the one cannot do, the other both can and will perform. Nor are their inward virtues more than their outward beauties, for the solar part is of so resplendent, transparent luster, that the eye of man is scarce able to endure it. And if the lunar part be exposed abroad in a dark night, birds will repair to and circulate about it as a fly around a candle, and submit themselves to the captivity of the hand, and this invites me to believe that the stone which the ancient hermit, being then 140 years old, took out of the wall in his cell and showed Cornelius Gallus, in the year 1602, was of the nature of this vegetable stone. For upon the opening his golden box, wherein it was enclosed, it dilated its beams all over the room, and that with so great splendor, that it overcame the light that was kindled therein. Besides, the hermit refused to project it upon metal, and being unworthy of it, but made his experiment upon Veronica and Rui. By the magical or prospective stone, it is possible to discover any person in what part of the world soever, although never so secretly concealed or hid in chambers, closets, or caverns of the earth. For there it makes a strict inquisition. In a word, it fairly presents to your view even the whole world, wherein to behold, hear, or see your desire. Nay, more, it enables man to understand the language of the creatures, as the chirping of birds, lowing of beasts, and so on, to convey a spirit into an image, by which observing the influence of heavenly bodies shall become a true oracle. And yet this, as E.A. assures you, is not anyways necromantical or devilish, but easy, wondrous easy, natural, and honest. Lastly, in touching the angelical stone, it is so subtle, saith the aforesaid author, that it can neither be seen, felt, or weighted, but tasted only. The voice of man, which bears some proportion to these subtle properties, comes short in comparison. Nay, the air the air itself is not so penetrable, and yet, O mysterious wonder, a stone that will lodge to the fire to eternity without being prejudiced. It hath a divine power, celestial and invisible, above the rest, and endows the possessor with divine gifts. It affords the apparition of angels, and gives a power of conversing with them, by dreams and revelations, nor dare any evil spirit approach the place where it lodgeth, because it is a quintessence, wherein there is no corruptible thing, and where the elements are not corrupt, no devil can stay or abide. S. Dustin calls it the food of angels, and by others it is termed the heavenly viaticum, the tree of life, and is undoubtedly, next under God, the true alkokodon, or giver of years. For by it man's body is preserved from corruption, being thereby enabled to live a long time without food. Nay, 'tis made a question whether any man can die that uses it, which I do not so much admire as to think why the possessors of it should desire to live, that have those manifestations of glory and eternity presented unto their fleshy eyes, but rather desire to be dissolved, and to enjoy the full fruition, than live where they must be content with the bar of speculation. After Hermes had once obtained the knowledge of this stone, he gave over the use of all other stones, and therein only delighted Moses and Solomon. Together with Hermes were the only three that excelled in the knowledge thereof, and who therewith wrought wonders. That there is a gift of prophecy hid in the red stone, Rachis will tell you, for thereby, saith he, philosophers have foretold things to come, and Petrus Bonus avers that they did profess, not only generally but specially, having a foreknowledge of the resurrection, incarnation of Christ, day of judgment, and that the world should be consumed with fire. This is not otherwise than from the insights of their operations. In brief, by the true and various use of the philosopher's prima materia, for there are diversities of gifts, but the same spirit, the perfection of liberal sciences are made known, and the whole wisdom of nature may be grasped. And, notwithstanding what has been said, I must further add that there are yet hid greater things than these, for we have seen but few of his works. Howbeit that there are but few stocks that are fitted to inoculate the grafts of this science on. They are mysterious and communicable to any but the adept, and those that have been devoted even from their cradles to serve and wait at this altar. And how rarely such have been heard of, may appear by Norton. For few, saith he, of scarcely one, in 15 kingdoms had our red stone. And they perhaps were, with St. Paul, caught up into paradise, and as he heard unspeakable words, for they wrought unoperable works, such as it is not lawful to utter. Of such as these, therefore, I will glory. I glory, yet of myself I will not glory, but of mine infirmities. And truly, whether such were in the body or out of the body, I cannot tell. God knoweth, doubtless, that they were not far from the kingdom of God. But I fear I have waded too far, and therefore now to give some particular account, as well touching the publication of this work, as also the disposition thereof and the nature of the obsolete language wherein it is written, I shall find in the first place acquaint the reader that the kind acceptance my former endeavours received at the hands of candid artists in publishing some chemical collections, very earnestly invited me to find out a second piece, wherewith to present those grateful persons. Whereupon I intended to rally up some of my own conceptions in this science, and expose them also to the test. But to this end, reviewing the philosophers, I found that many, assuming that name, wrote what their fancies, not their hands, had wrought, and further than in apprehension had not seen projection. Amongst whom our Ripley was sometime one, as appears by his ingenious retractation, hereafter mentioned. And being truly sensible of the great injury of such works have done young students, at the first not able to distinguish who have written upon their undeceivable experience, who not, and consequently not which to follow or which to avoid. I withdrew my thoughts, having never as yet set myself effectually upon the manual practice, lest I should add to the many injuries the world has already suffered by delivering the bare medley of my dubious apprehensions. The bare medley of my dubious apprehensions, without the confident attestation of practice, and be justly esteemed as indiscreet as those whom Ripley mentions. That prate of Robin Hood and of his bow, which never shot therein a true. Yet still casting about what to make choice of, at length, by the encouragements of some that are industrious after public benefit, centered my thoughts, and fixed them on this design of collecting all, or as many as I could meet with, of our own English Hermetic philosophers, and to make them public. Nor did I change this resolution with my close, notwithstanding the difficulties I saw, ready to encounter and obstruct the undertaking. For, besides the pains and care that was thereunto requisite, the fear of not meeting with or obtaining the original manuscripts or authentic copies of this nature, which I knew to be in some men's hands, yet wanting them myself, shrewdly beset, though nothing discouraged me, yet I therewith freely and plentifully supplied by some worthy and intimate friends, whom I would gladly here mention, but that I well know they delight not to see their names in print. These had, my care was next to dispose them in such a series as might be answerable to the respective times, wherein each author flourished, and withal to the best advantage of the laborious student, the which I have managed with so just an adequation as, I hope, will neither detract from the due honor of the one, nor yet disturb or darken the direct path of the other. But whilst I was doing this, I made a question in regard. Some philosophers had written verse, others in prose. Which of these should take precedency? And after some consideration, adjudged it to the poetic part, and that not only because its original may probably anticipate the time of Orpheus, although he be noted by Mayer's primus antistes sacerdos theologus, vates et doctor totius Graecorum nationis, because that Linus is said to be the most perite of any lyric poet, and so ancient that some suppose him master to Orpheus, who writ that admirable allegory of the golden fleece, and was the first of all Grecians that brought the chemic learning with other sciences out of Egypt, as the first that brought the Phoenician language to the Grecians. I say not only for that it is the ancientest and prose, but of latter use with other nations, but because poetry hath been most anciently used with us, and as if from a grant of nature held unquestionable. Again, the excellent melody thereof is so natural and universal that it seems to be born with all the nations of the world, as a hereditary eloquence proper to all mankind. Nor was this all, for I considered that it claims a general succession and reception in all nations, all ages, who were never without a Homer, a Virgil, an Ovid, nor not this small segment of the world, England, without a Rhasis Castrensis and a Hortulanus. For the first of these, his Liber Luminum and his Lumen de Luminium, are the ancientest now extant in Latin verse. Really? I've never heard of them. In the latter of which, I cannot omit the title of his Responsio Rhasis Castrensis Filio suo Merlino, whereby it appears that he was Merlin's contemporary, at least, if not his master, in this abstruse mystery. These works of his are both published by Hermanus, but very imperfectly, as I found by comparing them with a manuscript as ancient as King John's time. And for the second, he was the first Christian philosopher after Morianus, who, travelling abroad and returning hither in the reign of William the Conqueror, because he was the first that transplanted the chemical muses from the remotest parts into his own country, is called Garland ab coronam hermeticam et poeticam. But, to return to our matter, if neither its antiquity nor the natural ratification, general succession, and reception thereof were enough to allow it the right hand of fellowship, yet I suppose the effects thereof, which so affect and delight the ear, rejoice the heart, satisfy the judgment, and indulge the hearers, justly may. In regard, poesy has a life, a pulse, and such a secret energy as leaves in the mind, as far deeper impression than what runs in the slow and evenless numbers of prose, whereby it won so much upon the world, that in rude times, and even amongst barbarous nations, when other forts of learning stood excluded, there was nothing more in estimation, and for that we call rhythm, the custom diverse of our Saxon and Norman poets, shows the opinion that they had thereof, whilst the Latin, notwithstanding its excellency, could not sufficiently delight their ears, unless their verses in that language were formed with an harmonical cadence and brought into rhythm. Nor did the ancients wrap up their chiefest mysteries anywhere else than in the parabolical and elusive part of poetry, as the most sacred and venerable in their esteem, and the securest from profane and vulgar wits. For such was the goodness of our fathers, that they would not willingly hazard, much less throw, their children's bread among dogs. And therefore their wisdom and policy was, first, to find out a way to teach, then an art, which was this, to conceal. In a word, to prefer prose before poetry, is no other or better than to let a rough-hewn clown take the wall of a rich-clad lady of honour, or to hang a preference chamber with tarpaulin instead of tapestry. And for these reasons, and out of these respects, the poetical, as I conceived, deserved the precedency. Howbeit, probably, some of these pieces, now brought to public light, had well nigh perished in a silent ruin, and destruction got a complete victory over them. But that my diligence and laborious inquisition rescued them from the jaws thereof, being almost quite shrouded in the dust of antiquity and involved in the obscurity of forgotten things, with their leaves half worm-eaten. And a wonder it is that, like the creatures in Noah's Ark, they were hitherto so safely preserved from that universal deluge, which, at the dissolution of abbeys, overflowed our greatest libraries. And in doing so, I presume it no arrogance to challenge the reputation of performing a work, next that of a man's own, and something more, in that, as if having the elixir itself, I have made old age become young and lively, by restoring each of the ancient writers not only to the spring of their several beauties, but to the summer of their strength and perfection. As for the whole work itself, it is sheaved up from a few gleanings in part of our English fields, where, though I have bestowed my industry to pick up here and there what I could find in my way, yet I believe there are many other pieces of this nature in private hands, which, if any are pleased, out of the same ingenious score that I have published these, to communicate to me, I shall set thereon a value suitable to the worth of their favours, and let the world know its obligation to them besides. The style and language thereof may, I confess, to some seem irksome and uncouth, and so it is indeed to those that are strangers thereunto, but withal very significant. Old words have strong emphasis. Others may look upon them as rubbish or trifles, but they are grossly mistaken. For what some light brains may esteem as foolish toys, deeper judgments can and will value as found in serious matter. We English have often varied our fashions. Such is the levity of our fancies, and therefore if you meet with spellings different from those in use, or uncouth words as strangely ridiculous as a manche, hood, codpiece, or trunk-house, know, as they were the fashionable attires, so these the usual dialects of those times, and posterity will pay us in our own coin, should we deride the behaviour and dress of our ancestors. For we must consider that languages, which are daily used in our discourse, are in as continual mutation. What custom brings into habit is best likened for the present, whether it be to revive what is lost, or introduce something new, or to piece up the present with the retained shreds of what preceded. But learned tongues, which are contained in books, enjoy a more immutable fate, because not subject to be washed away with the daily tide and current of times. They are like the fashion and drapery wrought on marble statues, which must ever be retained without alteration. And therefore that the truth and worth of their works might receive no diminution by my transcription, I purposely retained the old words and manner of their spellings, as I found them in the originals, except only some palpable mistakes and blemishes of former transcribers, which I took upon me to correct and purge as little more than literal imperfections. Yet not to leave the reader unsatisfied, have added a compendious table for the interpretation of old, unusual, and obsolete words, and thereby smoothed, as I suppose, the passage for such as have not hitherto been conversant in these ancient rough-hued expressions. Wherefore you that love to converse with the dead, or consult with their monuments, draw near. Perhaps you may find more benefit in them than the living. There you may meet with the genii of our Hermetic philosophers, learn the language in which they wooed and courted Dame Nature, and enjoy them more freely, and at greater command to satisfy your doubts than when they were in the flesh. For they have written more than they would speak, and left their lines so rich as if they had dissolved gold in their ink, and clad their words with the sovereign moisture. My annotations are limited within the bounds of what is historical, or what occasionally must needs entrench on the confines of other arts, and all glosses upon the philosophical work purposefully omitted for the same reasons that I chose to send forth other men's children into the world rather than my own. And what presumptuous mistakes or errors the candid reader shall meet with will, I hope, be censured with no less favour and charity than that whereby they are wont to judge the faults of those they esteem their friends and well-wishers. And now to conclude, may the God of nature be graciously pleased, out of the immense treasury of his goodness, to vouchsafe all such whose good angels direct them to, or have already religiously engaged them in this mysterious knowledge, the full and entire accomplishments of a true and pious philosopher, to wit, learning, humility, judgment, courage, hope, patience, discretion, charity, and secrecy, that so they may enjoy the fruits of their labors, which otherwise will be but vain and unpleasant, and causelessly render the divine science and secret itself contemptible. Farewell, industrious students, and let your goodness still invite me to accomplish the end I have proposed, in doing which, I presume, you may one day esteem me better deserving your patronage, at leastwise your charitable censure, which is all the recompense expected or merited by him who is yours, really devoted. The 26th of January, 1651 or 52, he wasn't quite sure about the year. Elias Ashmole. All right, that was the introduction to the book. I may do some random sporadic readings from this book.